Good evening. Welcome to the 43rd Annual San Francisco Bay Area Day of Remembrance. This year's theme is No One is Free Until We Are All Free, 80 years after Executive Order 9066. I'm Jeffrey Matsuoka, Chair of the Bay Area Day of Remembrance Organizing Committee. Today, February 19th, 2022, marks the 80th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066 by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In 1942, Executive Order 9066 gave full authority to the Secretary of War and the military to exclude all persons from designated zones. While this order never mentioned Japanese or Japanese Americans, it authorized a series of military and civilian proclamations which named only persons of Japanese descent. It set into motion the exclusion, eventual forced removal, and mass incarceration of over 120,000 Japanese Americans, 2/3 of whom were American citizens, from their homes on the West Coast into remote government-run concentration camps under the false pretense of military necessity. There were no charges, no hearings, no trials. Yet, non-compliance would be punishable by fines and imprisonment. This episode is seen as one of the worst violations in American constitutional history. This year's theme is from a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King's words remind us that while our Japanese American community achieved a measure of justice through redress with the passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, real justice cannot be achieved until the underlying causes of systematic racism in our society are eradicated. Just as we fought for redress through multi-ethnic coalitions, we must work in coalition with our Black and Brown sisters and brothers in support of our Latin and African American communities seeking redress and reparations for the grave injustices that they have endured. Helping us illuminate our theme is our MC, Dr. Emily Murase. Dr. Murase is the new executive director of the Japantown Task Force. She formerly served as the director of the Department of Status of the Woman for the City of County of San Francisco. She was also the first Japanese American to be elected to the San Francisco Board of Education, on which she served 2 terms. We are honored to have her host this evening. Dr. Murase?
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you so much for your leadership in organizing today's event. Our program tonight focuses on Japanese American and African American solidarity, particularly around African American reparations. As Jeffrey said, our theme, No One is Free Until We Are All Free, underscores how fighting for racial justice for Black people in the U.S. uplifts us all. Commemorating the Day of Remembrance allows us to reflect on our shared values of equal protection, due process, and the fight for redress. Tonight, we also honor the perseverance of the elders of our community, our Issei and Nisei generations, who suffered these egregious actions by our government. We honor activists who fought to remedy these harms through the redress movement, which resulted in the historic Civil Liberties Act of 1988. But we also recognize that the work for reparations in our society is not yet done. Here to remind us of our shared struggles for equity and inclusion is our keynote speaker, John Osaki. John is a native San Franciscan and has served as the celebrated executive director of the Japanese Community Youth Council since 1996. John is also an award-winning filmmaker who has directed and produced promotional, educational, narrative, and documentary films. Most recently, he has screened his acclaimed documentaries, Alternative Facts, The Lies of Executive Order 9066, and Reparations. Please welcome the one and only John Osaki.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank the Bay Area Day of Remembrance Consortium for inviting me to speak today. And this is dedicated to Mom and Dad. My father was raised on the Sacramento Delta, where the fall sunsets were often set ablaze with heavenly shades of crimson and orange. My mother grew up in the heart of California's Central Valley, where Japanese American farmers would ultimately become too successful for their white competitors. It was in the staggering heat and tilled soil of the valley that white supremacist influences would seize upon the hysteria of the Pearl Harbor attack to set in motion the events that led to the signing of Executive Order 9066, 80 years ago today. My father would leave behind a poor yet bountiful teenage life of friends, football, fishing in the nearby sloughs, and the companionship of his beloved dog, Tenny. My mother's family would be among the many who would leave behind farms that were too often at the mercy of those who fanned the flames of hate in a deliberate and calculated movement to take over acres of fertile farmland for pennies on the dollar. 4 years later, my father would be among the very last to be released from the Tule Lake Segregation Center. He resettled in San Francisco, where he would encounter a society that did not want him. My mother's family eventually returned to California, and upon their arrival were greeted by somebody firing a shotgun through their front window in the middle of the night. The path forward for most Japanese Americans was to put their heads down, work hard, and subscribe to the belief that the nail that sticks out gets hit. As a means of survival, Japanese Americans would become the original model minority. After once being categorically labeled as an enemy alien, Japanese Americans now enjoyed the privilege of being considered the good minority. And for a time, this approach was both necessary and largely successful. But below the surface and embedded in every compliment directed our way was a white supremacist agenda at work. For as much as our community had experienced a horrific injustice, this country has many to atone for. We must never forget that leaders from the Black community figuratively and literally took a bullet for the civil rights of every American. During this moment of awakening and marches and student strikes, my father and my mother could have chosen to be model minorities. It would have been far less contentious to stay silent and complicit and follow the path of least resistance. But they chose another path. In the 1960s, when the urban renewal movement was wiping out minority neighborhoods, my father could not stay silent, as thousands of residents and businesses were targeted to be forcibly evicted. But my father and members from Christ United Presbyterian Church, along with community leaders such as Yori Wada, chose to stand together with Black activists such as Mary Rogers and Hannibal Williams in a group called the Western Addition Community Organization. Together, they stood in the path of bulldozers and were among the first vocal challengers to the redevelopment of our community. Though this band of advocates did not ultimately have enough community support to overcome the political power behind the urban renewal movement, my father stood with the Black community to ensure reinvestments were made back into the neighborhood, including the land and funding for what is now the Nihomachi Terrace housing development. My mother chose education as her opportunity for allyship. While many were pointing to Asian Americans as the model of what could be achieved through hard work, she understood that centuries of children and youth of color in under-resourced educational systems had devastating and multi-generational impacts on poor families. She knew in her heart that achieving educational success was far more than just trying harder, and raising the quality of schools for all children was a way to make progress towards leveling the playing field. She became a vocal advocate for desegregating the public schools in San Francisco and walked the walk when she and my father were in full support of sending their youngest, yours truly, to school in one of the poorest neighborhoods in San Francisco. While she supported every family's right to determine the educational path for their own children, It is not acceptable to view the inequities in educational access as someone else's problem. My father understood that there are many ways to be allies to other communities, and using your individual talents to help others realize their aspirations can come in many forms. His connection with the Black community would eventually lead to him being sought after for his architectural skills to design and realize the vision for many Black churches.
Mr. Wayne Osaki, who is here with his wife and with all of his children. I fell in love with his work and asked him to do this in the shape of an African cut. And I'd like for the Osaki family to stand so you can see that. I wanted our people to know that if we were to make it in America, we got to make friends with other ethnic groups that know something about suffering.
In 1981, when the movement for Japanese American redress and reparations was moving forward, leaders from other communities of color could have dismissed our efforts. They could have said, what about us? What about the ways that our communities had been harmed by this country? But leaders at the time understood that divisions between communities of color are what white supremacists in this country count on. We must be grateful that many came forward, including Congressman Ron Dellums, to demand that reparations for Japanese Americans was the right thing to do.
This is not about how long you were in prison. It is about how much pain was inflicted upon thousands of American people who happen to be Japanese in terms of ancestry. But this Black American cries out as loudly as my Asian American brothers and sisters on this issue.
A year after the 1988 Civil Liberties Act authorized redress and reparations for Japanese Americans, Congressman John Conyers introduced H.R. 40 to create a commission and hold hearings on the harm inflicted on the Black community from slavery and ongoing forms of systemic racism in America. The same playbook that Japanese Americans had just successfully executed was met with indifference and denial and silence from the American public. Today, as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066, we must understand as a community that our work is not done. As one of the few communities that has achieved reparations, we must consider the responsibility that comes with that acknowledgement. We must consider the racist playbook which led to our entire community being forcibly rounded up and incarcerated continues to persist in America. In recent years, we've seen communities in this country scapegoated and blamed for the challenges we face as a nation based solely on their race or religion. We have seen political leaders stoke racial hatred and violence towards marginalized communities, including Asian Americans. We have seen our democracy compromised based on the assertion of national security. The aversion of many to being the nail that sticks out has not kept us safe, or will prevent us from being targeted when public officials need a scapegoat for the next national emergency. Atonement for the World War II incarceration of our community will not be complete until the systemic racism that imprisoned my father and my mother is eradicated in the United States. And until that day comes, our work is not done. We must be allies to others seeking atonement for the harm that has been inflicted on their communities. We must be critical of all efforts which divide communities of color, because it is only together that we can build the power necessary to dismantle the efforts of those who are clinging to racist ideologies in this country. My father and mother did not view themselves as civil rights heroes, but they understood that they had it within themselves to make a difference, not just for our family or our community, but for others who continue to live under the burden of oppression that prevents this country from realizing its promise as a democracy for all. This Day of Remembrance cannot just be about remembering the past. It must be an annual call to action for the harm that is yet to be atoned for in America. Our work is not done, and if you have the compassion to lift up others and seek reparations for the Black community and atonement for Japanese Latin Americans, I invite you to join me and others from all over this country, and let's get to work.
Thank you, John, for your very personal story, that important community history, and call for action. Be sure to watch his most recent film, Reparations, which screens next week. This morning in a KQED radio interview, Hollywood celebrity George Takei, who famously played Sulu in the original Star Trek series, also emphasized the importance of supporting the African-American struggle for reparations. We're privileged to welcome the Honorable Barbara Lee. First elected to the House of Representatives in 1998 to represent the East Bay, Congressmember Lee is the highest-ranking Black woman in the U.S. Congress. Congressmember Lee has long been a strong ally to Japanese Americans. Prior to the passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, she was Congressmember Ron Dellum's chief of staff and coordinated local and national efforts for Japanese American redress. Congresswoman Lee is a key sponsor of H.R. 40 that John referenced to establish a national commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans, which has been introduced at every congressional session since 1989. Last April, the House Judiciary Committee voted to send it to the House floor for full consideration. Welcome, Congressmember Barbara Lee.
Good afternoon. I'm Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and I proudly represent California's beautiful 13th Congressional District, which is a wonderful, diverse, beautiful, brilliant, progressive congressional district. Thank you to the Bay Area Day of Remembrance Consortium for organizing this event to acknowledge the anniversary of one of the darkest chapters in American history. Today, on the Day of Remembrance of Japanese internment, it is important that we recognize those who were impacted, those who were affected, and how those repercussions are felt today. 78 years ago, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 to wrongfully imprison more than 120,000 Japanese Americans. This act centered in bigotry and injustice. It was a shameful moment in our nation's history. When I worked for our great warrior, Congressman Ron Dellum, in the 80s, one of his most impassioned stances was fighting for reparations for Japanese Americans affected by internment. And I was proud to be by his side during many of those efforts. We won that fight, but today we are still fighting for reparations for other historically marginalized groups that have experienced violence and injustice at the hands of the American government. For example, I'm working with my colleagues to pass a bill to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. That's H.R. 40. The role of federal government in supporting the institution of enslaving men, women, and children and subsequent systemic racism and discrimination directed against Blacks is an injustice that must be formally acknowledged and redressed. I believe that reparations are a critical part of how we must address the past evils of slavery and racism and begin to repair the harms that are still experienced today. This is a fight we will continue to wage until justice is done. It is more important than ever for us to stand together in this fight and remain steadfast in the work we still have to do. And so I want to thank you again to all the organizers of this event and to everyone participating today. I am incredibly proud to represent my Japanese American constituents in the East Bay, and I thank them for the immeasurable impact they have had on the Bay Area and our nation. Thank you again.
Thank you, Congressmember Lee. We absolutely need the Congress to take up H.R. 40. Next up, we have a performance by the extraordinary Anthony Brown. In 1997, Dr. Brown served as director of Jazz and Justice, Big Bands Behind Barbed Wire, a federally funded project to educate the American public about the Japanese American incarceration. The Asian American Jazz Orchestra was founded as a touring cultural component, collaborating with San Jose Taiko and touring from coast to coast. In 2018, this ensemble held their final performance as the headlining event of the San Francisco International Arts Festival, where they were joined by the late San Francisco poet laureate and activist Janice Midikitani, whom we tragically lost last year. We'd like to share with you this memorable performance next.
For 40 years, my mother kept her silence about the camps. And finally, in 1981, before the commission hearings on redress, she passionately broke her silence. I have included portions of her testimony in this poem, Breaking Silence. There are miracles that happen, she said, from the silences in the glass caves of our ears, from the crippled tongue, testimonies waiting like winter. Mr. Commissioner, the U.S. Army Signal Corps confiscated our property. It was subjected to vandalism and ravage. I was forced to sign documents giving you the authority to take. This land, she tells, was an immigrant's hope, promising dreams of a good life growing from good earth. And then all was hushed for announcements. Take only what you can carry. Mr. Commissioner, it seems we were singled out from others who were under suspicion. Our neighbors were of German and Italian descent, some whom were not citizens. It seems we were singled out. My mother wore her work like tapestry, weaving the soil with quiet roses, tomatoes, mustard greens. And then all was hushed for announcements. To be incarcerated for your own good. The sounds of her work bolted in barracks, silenced. Mr. Commissioner, I delivered mail in camp, carried a letter to an elderly Issei couple, informing them that their 5 sons were killed in combat, serving in the United States Army, serving this country that imprisons their families. These memories, like silent stones, weighted my heart. but no more. So, Mr. Commissioner, when you tell me my time is up, to sit down, to shut up, I tell you this. How much time have you taken from our lives? Pride has kept my lips pinned by nails, my rage coffined. But I exhume my past to claim this time. Words are better than tears, so I spill them. I kill this, the silence. There are miracles that happen, she said, and everything is made visible. We are lightning and justice. Our souls become transparent like glass. We recognize ourselves at last. We hear everything. We are a rainforest of color and noise. We are unafraid. Our language is beautiful.
I hope you enjoyed that video performance by the Asian American Jazz Orchestra. Glad to see Janice again. We miss her so much. Next is Ito, an American gossip. Throughout her career, Lauren has worked at community organizations tackling hate crimes, women's health, and food apartheid. As an artist and organizer, Lauren delves into the tensions arising from diasporic experiences. Her work has been featured by the San Francisco Public Library, the Seattle Times, and the Japanese American National Museum. Please welcome Lauren Ito.
In 2021, we said goodbye to a giant who walked among us, Janice Mirikitani. She was a dearly beloved activist, mentor, community organizer, co-founder of Glide, second poet laureate of San Francisco, mentor, mother, and friend. For those of us who had the honor of knowing Janice firsthand, it's no secret that her life was a force of transformation. She lived fiercely, tenderly, and with a love that couldn't help but ignite change in all those that surrounded her. When I first met Janice, I shared with her that her poetry was the first time I felt seen. Janice's words and memory have deeply impacted my own organizing and creative journey. In sharing these reflections about Janice's impact, I have met numerous other people who have similar reflections of different genres. To honor Janice's life and legacy, I'll be reading a few poems to share with you today. We the Dangerous by Janice Mirikitani. I swore it would not devour me. I swore it would not humble me. I swore it would not break me. And they command we dwell in the desert, our children the spawn of barbed wire and barracks, we closer to the earth, squat, short-thighed, knowing the dust better, and they would have us make the garden, rake the grass to soothe their feet. We, akin to the jungle, plodding with the snake, tails shedding in civilized America, and they would have us skin their fish, deft hands like blades sliding back flesh, bloodless. We who awaken the river, ocean's child, whale eater, and they would have us strange scented women, round shoulders strong and yellow like the moon, to pull the thread to the cloth to loosen their backs, massaged in myth. We who till the secret bed, the sweatshops, the laundries, and they would dress us in napalm, skin shred to clothe the earth, bodies filling pockmarked fields, dead fish bloating our harbors. We, the dangerous, dwelling in the ocean, akin to the jungle, close to the earth. Hiroshima, Vietnam, Tule Lake. And yet we were not devoured, and yet we were not humbled, and yet we are not broken. This next poem is titled Arrival as We, and is inspired by some advice Janice shared with me to always write towards the light. Thousands of women hum in my blood, forced to play God, cradled their knives with a gentle hand, lifted gazes to the horizon and summoned air, tucked it into laugh lines, a teacup, a birthmark, a prayer for generations yet to unfurl, knowing breath is never promised always, especially these days. Always, always. Remember this, inhaling sunrise and birdsong, we never arrive alone. For Janice. A soft blanket, a place to weep, you transformed us, who we felt permission to become. Heroes affirmed in our bones, our lineages held sacred. This poem, a memory of hugs swaddled in gardenia petals, a laugh that shook the ground and reverberates yet still. Stockton to Arkansas to San Francisco, block to block, from Japantown to the Tenderloin to warmth of kitchen table, your words weaving new futures. We cradle your memory between fingertips, even through tears. I remind myself of your legacy, a reminder to always write towards the light.
Thank you, Lauren. Her backgrounds were the Japanese Tea Garden, the Shakespeare Garden, the Bandshell, and the DeYoung Museum, all in Golden Gate Park. She reminds us that the organizing work of the late Janice Mirikitani and her husband, the Reverend Cecil Williams of Glide Memorial Church, inspires our continued advocacy for redress and reparations. On February 15th, this past week, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors unanimously passed a resolution commemorating today, February 19th, 2022, as the city's Day of Remembrance on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066. As former president of the San Francisco Board of Education, Shaman Walton spearheaded the effort to close the achievement gap for Black, Latino, and special needs students and help secure funding for the school district's first African American Achievement and Leadership Initiative. Now, president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, President Walton helped create the African American Reparations Advisory Committee to develop a comprehensive reparations plan for the city's African American community. Tonight, President Walton will address the work of the Reparations Advisory Committee.
Hi, this is Shaman Walton, president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, representing District 10. We started the African American Advisory Council for Reparations here in San Francisco due to all of the injustices, not only here in San Francisco, but for Black people across this country for over 200 years. Being brought here to this country forced to provide free labor, not being able to reproduce, not being able to receive an education and learn how to read, having all of your history taken from you, which has in turn led to all the wealth gaps that exist for the Black community, all the education gaps that exist for the Black community, all the over-criminalization. Things that don't just happen in the South below the Mason-Dixon line, but also affect us here in San Francisco. And so the Reparations Advisory Council, a Reparations Advisory Task Force, is in place to do everything we can to right the wrongs of the past and repair the damage. So we're going to be looking into addressing the wealth gaps that exist, working on home ownership, finding ways to make sure that people who have been over-criminalized receive their fair share, looking into making sure that we address affordability in the Black community, and at the end of the day, create the equity that Black people deserve here in San Francisco. So yes, we have to put a task force together that will work to monetize ways to address that and come up with solutions that address those gaps that exist for the Black community. A lot of people want us to be specific about what reparations is going to look like, but quite frankly, that is the job of the reparations task force that's in place, to look at all the injustices and come up with a plan and a package that's going to right some of the wrongs of the past. You could see reparations addressing education, for instance, and providing a free education to every Black person that graduates from high school in San Francisco. Strategies like that have been discussed. You could see down payment assistance for Black people to own homes here in San Francisco because they were forced out of the city due to redevelopment or due to gentrification and high cost of living and lack of education opportunities. So there are many strategies being discussed, but no definitive strategies in terms of actually what the true reparations package will look like, because that's the job of the task force. The reparations task force is in place, and per legislation, it's about an 18-month process. They come out with a report and let us know what they're going to do, what strategies they're going to employ, what are the objectives, what are the goals, and we received that at the end of December 2021. Now they're doing the work as a committee to address those objectives and those goals that really define what the plan to move forward was. So we'll get another report in about 6 months. We'll have a forum and have conversations and a hearing to learn about the process and learn what's taking place. But the whole process for coming up with the plan and the reparations package is about 18 months, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you for that update, President Walton. We made a good team on the school board. Films of Remembrance is a showcase of films commemorating the forced removal and incarceration of the Japanese American community in American concentration camps during World War II. Launched in 2012 by the Nichibei Foundation to educate the public and empower filmmakers by creating a venue for their work, Films of Remembrance has expanded from San Francisco, Japantown to Sacramento, New York City, and San Jose, Japantown. This year, some 10 films will be screened virtually from February 26th and 27th with post-film discussions, all available to stream until March 13th. And now a trailer from this year's Films of Remembrance.
In April 2018, a journey began for 5 San Francisco Bay Area artists: Reiko Fuji, Ellen Bepp, Kathy Fujioka, Judy Shintani, and Sherry Arai DeBoer shared a common history. Their relatives were unjustly imprisoned in American concentration camps during World War II. These included Topaz Camp in Utah, Heart Mountain Camp in Wyoming, Gila River Camp in Arizona, Amachi Camp in Colorado, Crystal City Family Camp in Texas, Lordsburg Camp in New Mexico, and Tule Lake and Manzanar camps in California. This particular journey to the Manzanar camp transported the artists deeper into their families' roots, to imagine a time when their relatives were sent to desolate areas of the country. The artists sought to dig deeper beneath the layers, to reveal more about this unjust history that connected them, as they discovered unexpected insights and unique shared experiences. These Sansei, or third-generation Japanese artists, came together as daughters and granddaughters, open, seeking, with a desire to honor their ancestors who had endured the World War II incarceration.
She had a singular purpose in life, and that was to create her art.
They didn't have any cameras, were not allowed, you see, and immediately went out to do minute sketches of everything in camp. And I decided to stay back and finish this set of drawings that I was doing for the book, which turned into Citizen 13660.
I mean, I really marvel at the audacity of Mineo Kubo to get her memoir published, you know, at a time when the incarceration experience was still a current event. It wasn't even recent history yet.
I think that she serves as a perfect example of an artist of color who's defiant and refuses to, quote unquote, assimilate into the white male art world. For that, I think she's very inspiring.
We were afraid. You look like the enemy, but we're American citizens.
What did we do to deserve this? And of course the answer is our face, our race. Towers, searchlights, barbed wire fences around us. If they thought we were trying to escape, they had the right to shoot us.
Here you are with people all in various stages of grief, grieving the loss of their lives, because their lives were stolen by the government.
Even at the time that we were released, there was no declaration that there had been a mistake, that these were innocent people that the government had violated.
We, the Japanese, are not going to be taken again. That's done with. But other group will be taken for a different reason to a different place that's essentially the same.
We are not going to stand by. We will speak out. We will stand with. We will get arrested for. We will commit civil disobedience.
You need to move today, now, right now. Move.
As a way of upholding our values of loving and caring about our brothers and sisters.
Right here is the hotbed, the nerve center of the spy system, of planning for sabotage in accordance with a prearranged plan wherein each of our little Japanese friends will know his part in the event of any possible attempted invasion or air raid, and a secret loyalty to the Japanese emperor, rounding up the Japanese and putting them where they could do no harm.
You take folks from their native land, their native country, you strip them of every piece of dignity of life, and you make them work, and you make them work for free.
I don't think we're ever going to have a healed country until we address the root of the harm that has been caused in the United States.
We were promised 40 acres and a mule after slavery. Obviously, those promises were broken.
African Americans, Black Americans supported our struggles for justice.
It is about how much pain was inflicted upon thousands of American people who happen to be Japanese in terms of ancestry. But this black American cries out as loudly as my Asian American brothers and sisters.
They committed no crimes, yet they were imprisoned by the U.S. government. Their arrests and incarceration were motivated by racism, fear, and the failure of political leadership. These are the untold stories of Hawaii Island, Maui County, Oahu, and Kauai.
There's stories about things that happen here, but nobody listens. My people, my ancestors, my grandparents have lived on this lake for thousands of years. Outsiders came into this valley and renamed it. We call it Payahunadu, which means the place where the water always flows.
I was evacuated from Los Angeles on May 9th, 1942. We were sent to the Manzanar concentration camp. The period I spent in Manzanar was the most traumatic experience of my life.
Manzanar is 1 square mile of land that has a deep history of forced removal.
Los Angeles bones in the heart of the valley.
They came here for the water.
They are trying to recharacterize this valley as always being a desert. What made it such a desert is their pumping.
This was the lake. This was all water before that.
Many people who lived at Manzanar developed upper respiratory breathing problems, like my grandmother.
I just don't have any energy. When I walk a little ways, I get tired real fast.
Not only was water a major factor in the siting of Manzanar, water was also the means of resistance.
This water, our water, it's there for everybody. Natives, non-natives, everybody. Don't take everything.
I think we've reached a point in America where we have to look on ourselves as more of a diverse nation.
Hope you will catch the Films of Remembrance next weekend. I want to give a shout out to Kenji Taguma, whose vision created this film festival, and Greg Valoria, who has helped make it a reality. Special welcome to Dr. Anthony Brown, founder of the Asian American Jazz Orchestra, who's in our audience tonight. Now we have an important update from Grace Shimizu of the Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans.
My name is Grace Shimizu. My father was a Japanese immigrant resident who was kidnapped from his home in Peru and interned in a Department of Justice concentration camp in Texas under the U.S. Latin American Extraordinary Rendition and Hostage Exchange programs during World War II. I live in Oakland, California, which is in the traditional territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded or stolen land of the Lushan Ohlone people. I serve as the director of the Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans, and of the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project. I'd like to share our Japanese Latin American, or JLA Redress Update Report, and the next steps in our justice struggle for U.S. government accountability and reparations. We need your help to help kick off Redress Phase 2 with our JLA Day of Action on February 24th. So what do we want? Well, we want justice. We want the U.S. government to be accountable for the civil and human rights violations, the war crimes, the crimes against humanity that it perpetrated against our families during World War II. We're talking about kidnapping, or hostage taking, indefinite internment in U.S. concentration camps, forced labor, 2 hostage exchanges, and being thrust as civilians into the war zones of the Far East, forced deportation from the U.S. to war-devastated Japan under U.S. military occupation after the war, the denial of our rights of return to our homes and businesses in Peru and Latin America, and our bogus classification as illegal aliens to justify our internment, the exploitation of our labor, and the denial of our right to redress. How long must we wait for justice? We began our struggle 80 years ago in the U.S. concentration camps, seeking protection under the Geneva Convention as civilians during wartime. We've testified at congressional hearings, pursued 5 lawsuits, and 2 pieces of failed legislation. There has been no proper justice for us in the U.S. courts, the U.S. Congress, nor the White House. In 2003, we took the case of Art Shibayama and his 2 brothers to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, a body of the Organization of American States. This commission is a premier human rights body in the Americas, which serves as a venue of last resort when you cannot get justice in your own country. In 2020, this commission published its groundbreaking decision in favor of the Shibayama brothers. It affirms our right to redress and to reparations for government violations of human rights that occurred almost 80 years ago. It underscores that the principles of equality before the law, equal protection, and non-discrimination are among the most basic human rights, and that equal protection of the law applies to nationals and aliens alike. And it ruled that the U.S. government owes meaningful material and moral redress to the JLAs for long-standing violation of human rights. The Trump and Biden administrations have refused to acknowledge the jurisdiction of the Commission. Our requests for resolution have been ignored. Now is the time to bring pressure on the Biden administration to uphold international law and comply with the Commission's rulings. And never before have the U.S. people become aware and open to the need for national dialogue and reckoning with the deep racial divides, economic inequities, and political polarization, which are tearing our social fabric and undermining our democracy. We stand in solidarity with justice struggles for government accountability and reparations, including slavery reparations. What's our next step? Phase 2 of the historic Japanese-American Campaign for Redress is underway. The signing of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 granted redress to Japanese Americans who were citizens or legal permanent residents for their World War II incarceration. But the JLAs were excluded. Now, after the major victory with the Commission decision, JLAs are calling upon everyone to build on the gains of Phase 1 of the Japanese American redress movement and win redress for the Japanese Latin Americans. Please join us for the JLA Day of Action on Thursday, February 24th. We want the White House to be flooded with phone calls. Go to the Campaign for Justice website, Facebook page, or Instagram page to get a sample script. And for more information about how you can become a part of this exciting campaign, because now is the time. Sign the JLA petition, donate, volunteer, do what you can, and let's secure JLA reparations together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. My father-in-law, the late Izumi Taniguchi, always spoke about the day that the Japanese Latin Americans arrived in Crystal City, where he and his family were incarcerated. And they had no idea why they were there. They only had the clothes on their backs. He always recounted this story. So I hope many of you will join this effort effort to bring justice to the Japanese Latin Americans who were kidnapped from their country. Next up, we have a performance by Yukiya Jerry Iwaki. Jerry works as an advocate for re-envisioning nutrition programs in schools. He moonlights as a spoken word artist, a writer, and the creator and host of The Buffet Show, a podcast showcasing artists, community organizers, and educators, and highlights their sacrifices and processes. The piece we're going to show you is called Tell Me Who's Free, a personal and historical reflection that pushes boundaries. Simon Wong is the main videographer.
I haven't seen you out here on Sundays for a while now. I must say it's great to see you. During the Oshoko, you looked like you were trying to bathe in the burning Osenko. I must say it's not something I see very often. Is everything okay? You have your hands clenched in a tight fist, your knuckles white, your fingernails digging into your palms. Don't you know that it's easier to grab hold of things with open hands? Open hands can also allow you to let things go. Do you know how to let things go? Do you know what else you can do with open hands? This. Reverend, there's a reason why you are, and I am not. A kid from Kolinga who has a lot to reconcile. First, by cutting off my motherland, knowing that there's really nothing for me there other than kinfolk and no connection. Then having no connection to the historical memory of family being incarcerated here. Where does that leave me? I had to embrace a collective memory, being an outsider. I had to seek it. I had to seek freedom. Was it freedom that made a person alter his appearance, change his name to Clyde Sarah, only to get arrested walking on the streets of San Leandro with his girlfriend? Was it freedom that allowed you to defend this country while your family was confined behind barbed wire? How much sweat do I have to spill before I can get between blood and tears? How many times do I gotta die before I get this damn life right? How much change will you give me for a Frisco 5? Reverend, when you pray, what do you pray for? I held the hand of Yuri Kochiyama, who felt the blood and held the body of Malcolm X after he was assassinated in the Audubon Theater. If I've given you a hug or a handshake or a fist bump post-2000, now you know that. What are you going to do with that? These same hands lay on top of my father's chest for over 10 minutes after he had passed, trying to bring him back to life. And that's when I realized I ain't no superhero. February 19, 1942. They try to cancel our culture. 80 years later, you got sushi and ramen spots on every other block. Professor Young told me that they used to lynch Chinese folks off the bridges in Santa Cruz. Young professors need to know what time it is. Watch. You watch. And if all you do is just watch, they'll try to turn January 6th to a national holiday. Munemori rolling in his grave to think that he dove onto that grenade just to see this happen? Come to the house uninvited and don't even take your damn shoes off? And while we're taking shots, I'm taking shots at guard towers, taking shots at the nation's oldest Asian American Pacific Islander civil rights organization that had to sell out their own people. Don't think I forgot. Shots at guardians who think they know better. You don't know better. Taking shots at people who take shots at POC, taking shots at me. And if one of them happens to hit and I take my very last breath, just know that I was for freedom, not faux freedom. Hey, Reverend, have you looked right into the face of a killer? I just murdered my social media accounts. So if you're looking for freedom, come and find me. Because the biggest form of freedom I can find is the freedom to just walk away.
The backdrop for Jerry's piece is, of course, Benkyodo, the beloved manju shop that is scheduled to close in March after a century of business in Japantown. Thank you so much for that piece, Jerry. We know you're in the audience tonight. Dr. Clifford I. Ueda was a San Francisco pediatrician and outspoken human rights activist. As national president of the Japanese American Citizens League, Dr. Ueda pushed for the successful rescinding of Executive Order 9066. Under his leadership, a grassroots campaign led to the establishment of a presidential commission to investigate the causes and consequences of Executive Order 9066. Working with other community partners, and as a result, this brought about public awareness to the injustice and paved the way for redress and reparations. In 2004, the year following his death, the Bay Area Day of Remembrance Consortium created the Dr. Clifford I. Ueda Peace and Humanitarian Award in his honor. Presented in recognition of courageous leadership and dedication to the principles of peace and social justice, this year's award goes to Karen Kai and posthumously to Robert Rusky. Karen and Bob were instrumental figures in Fred Korematsu's Coram Nobis case in the 1980s, which led to the historic overturning of his wartime conviction 4 decades after his incarceration. Bob was remembered as a tireless and uncompromising advocate for civil rights by fellow Coram Nobis attorney Don Tamaki. Lead attorney Dale Minami remembered Bob as an unsung civil rights hero who was both modest and fierce in his devotion to the rights of all people. This husband and wife duo were a part of the pro bono legal team that sued the San Francisco YWCA for the former Japanese YWCA building in San Francisco, Japantown. They secured a settlement requiring the Y to sell the building and adjacent playground lot to Nihonmachi Little Friends, a multicultural childcare agency serving economically and ethnically diverse families. Both Karen and Bob were also involved with the Friends of Hibakusha, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting medical visits for atomic bomb survivors, with Bob serving as president. They were also involved in efforts to save the Japanese bilingual and bicultural program, the program now at Rosa Parks Elementary School. A tireless community advocate, Karen is active in the Rainbow World Fund in solidarity with the LGBTQ plus community at the annual World Tree of Hope tree trimming, and is a member of the Japantown Task Force Land Use Transportation Committee. Sadly, Bob passed away on November 22nd, 2021, after a courageous battle with cancer, but his passion for justice will always be remembered by those who are lucky enough to know him. Presenting the awards to Karen Kai and posthumously to Bob Rusky, we know that Karen's in the audience today, is Eloy Maoki, representing last year's recipient, Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans.
Good afternoon. My name is Eloy Maoki. On behalf of the Day of Remembrance Consortium, it is my honor to present the 2022 Dr. Clifford I. Ueda Peace and Humanitarian Award to Karen Kai and Robert Rusky.
Bob and I have been fortunate to be able to work on a number of legal cases, causes, and community issues that have had personal and societal meaning. And in the course of this work, we have been blessed to have worked with people whose dedication, knowledge, insight, and determination gave us constant inspiration and support. To you, dear friends and colleagues, I send my deepest gratitude and warm wishes. I am also grateful to the two men we remember today with this award. To Dr. Ueda and Bob Rusky, I say, Okage-sama de. Thank you for helping me become the person I am by nurturing me with your example and support. Both Bob and Dr. Ueda were courageous, principled, generous, kind, and dedicated individuals whose efforts strengthened our community and our world. They looked beyond the orthodoxy of popular opinion in their pursuit of justice and truth. They looked to the past to inform the present. They listened and learned with open hearts and minds to expand their understanding. They questioned reasons and rationales to understand the ends, and they weighed the consequences of their positions in order to advance justice and freedom for all. I look forward to continuing to work to fulfill their ideals and example. This award will be a cherished and continuing reminder of them and their spirit. Again, thank you, and okage-sama de.
Congratulations, Karen. The honor is very well deserved, and we miss Bob so much, but we know that he is with us, within us. The annual candle lighting ceremony is the centerpiece of our Day of Remembrance observance. We remember the people unjustly incarcerated by the American government during World War II. For many of us, it's our parents and grandparents. In my case, it was my father, Kenji, uncles Charles and Yoshio, my grandparents, Moto and Mansuji, who were imprisoned at Poston. The candle lighting structure was lovingly created by George Iwao, a former incarceree and member of the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations. There are 11 candles, one representing each of the 10 War Relocation Authority camps, and the center candle representing the 9 Department of Justice camps, including Crystal City, Texas, where most of the Japanese Latin Americans and some persons of German and Italian descent were incarcerated. Our theme, No One is Free Until All Are Free, 80 years after Executive Order 9066, is reflected in the selection of this year's candle lighters, whose work continues to protect civil liberties and immigrant rights, the abolition of inequality and racism, as well as the fight for our brothers and sisters in the Black and Brown communities. These candle lighters represent the best of all of us, carrying the light for justice. We will start with a purification ceremony led by the ministers of the Conco Church of San Francisco. I know many of them have joined us in the audience tonight. The ceremony will end with a benediction by ministers also from the Japanese American Religious Federation.
Ichido haire. So we will begin the ceremony with 4 sincere claps. One hand alone cannot make a clapping sound, just as it takes both hands to make this sound, to symbolize our working together with our divine parent of the universe, each other, and the spirits of all the pioneers and all our loved ones who came before us. Let us clap our hands together 4 times with a grateful and joyful heart. Ichido haire. Saishu, Sojo, reading of the main service prayer.
Let us humbly bow our heads to receive this candle lighting blessing and purification rite. to symbolically cleanse our hearts and minds of negative thoughts and emotions, and fill our hearts with appreciation for this virtual 2022 Bay Area Day of Remembrance with the theme, "No one is free until we are all free," 80 years after Executive Order 9066. Here in nature, between heaven and earth, at the Neomachi Terrace Japanese Garden, we pray to our divine universal parent Kami to bless this special event and send our sincere thoughts and hearts of love and respect to all those who were interned during World War II, the majority of who have already transitioned to their spiritual form, whom we pray for their eternal peace and happiness. We thank you for your legacy and virtues, which we hope are passed on to your descendants and handed down to future generations. Let us fill our hearts with peace, joy, love, gratitude, understanding, acceptance, complete healing, and compassion. May we realize, remember, share the message, and advocate that no one is free until we are all free. May we all have hearts one with you through our divine mediator, Ikigami Konko Daiji, to our divine parent of the universe, Tenchi Kanenokami. We deeply thank you.
Onusa Gyoji, purification rite, symbolic purification of our hearts. Ichido Haire, solemn acknowledgement, 4 sincere claps.
Lighting the center candle in remembrance of those incarcerated in Department of Justice internment camps and U.S. Army facilities are Kazuharu, George, Jorge Carlos Naganuma, and Kazumu, Kaz, Julio Cesar Naganuma. The Naganuma brothers, George and Kaz, were born in Callao, Peru. At 5 years and 20 months old, respectively, they and their family of 9 were kidnapped by the FBI and forced to board a U.S. cargo ship and trained to the Crystal City concentration camp in March 1944. After 3.5 years, they were released in September 1947, and with the legal help of Wayne Collins, the Naganuma family was allowed to remain in the United States and settled in San Francisco through the sponsorship of Reverend Yoshiaki Fukuda of the Konko Church. In 2019, the Naganuma brothers participated in the Crystal City Pilgrimage, of which Kaz was a co-chair. Kaz continues to donate his time to organizations in the Japanese American community and is currently designing the Alameda Japantown historical markers and the Enemy Alien Files exhibition. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 7,318 Nikkei incarcerated at the Amachi concentration camp in Colorado is Dr. Tomomi Kinukawa. Dr. Kinukawa is a queer scholar activist with Zainichi Korean and Japanese ancestries and founding member of the San Francisco Comfort Women Justice Coalition, which supports the ongoing redress struggle of victims of the World War II Japanese military sexual slavery system. As a lecturer at San Francisco State University, they co-organized open classrooms with Dr. Rabab Abdul Hadi, director of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies, including an annual San Francisco State Day of Remembrance. Confronting opposition to such collaboration, Dr. Kinukawa filed a grievance against San Francisco State's administration's collusion with right-wing Zionist advocacy groups and private tech corporations for violations of academic freedom. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 13,348 Nikkei incarcerated at the Gila River concentration camp in Arizona is Tara Umemoto. Tara lives on the unceded native land of the Ohlone people. She is the granddaughter of Rio, Mieko, Kazuo, and Teruko, who were incarcerated during World War II in the Heart Mountain and Topaz incarceration camps. Her grandfather Kazuo also served in the 442nd. It is this heritage and her Buddhist values that drove Tara to become a social worker and social justice advocate. Tara is co-president of the Berkeley chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League, where she leads and supports efforts to bring to light the violations of civil rights, focusing on community building and starting conversations to educate each other about injustices and how to prevent them. Tara is also a member of the Young Buddhist Editorial Social Justice Committee, where she helped to build a series to educate about the injustices Black and Brown communities face and on how racism and injustice is embedded in many of our systems. Tara deeply believes that education is key to prevention and community building, and community solidarity is key to healing. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 10,767 Nikkei incarcerated at the Heart Mountain concentration camp in Wyoming is Takeshi Tak Yamamoto. Tak was born in Seattle, Washington in 1929 and returned to Japan with his family in 1936, where their home was bombed in Kobe in 1945. Tak returned to the United States when he was 20 and joined the U.S. Army, where he served in the Military Intelligence Service during the Korean War, translating documents in Korea and Japan. Tak lives in Oakland with his wife Pat, who was incarcerated in Heart Mountain, Wyoming as a child. Tak is passionate about peace and justice and advocating for the marginalized and oppressed. Locally, he serves the hungry and unhoused 2 to 3 times a month, has built Habitat for Humanity homes, advocated for the developmentally disabled, and participated in rallies in support of immigrants, racial justice, LGBTQ+, anti-war, and anti-nuclear issues. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 8,497 Nikkei incarcerated at the Jerome concentration camp in Arkansas is Laith Gulam. Laith is a graduate student at San Francisco State University. They do work mapping the experiences of queer Iranian diasporas in the Los Angeles area. Laith has been working with Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diaspora studies at San Francisco State and helped to organize this year's Day of Remembrance. They have led a graduate student effort to support the Ahmed program and create curriculum despite censorship and attacks by the university and private corporations. Laith has also worked on the Iranian Diaspora Archive and the Del Bedel podcast with the Center for Iranian Diaspora Studies. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 10,046 Nikkei incarcerated at the Manzanar concentration camp in California is Gerald Lenoir. Gerald Lenoir is the Identity and Politics Strategy Analyst at the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. From 2006 to 2014, he was the founding director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. From 1989 to 1995, he was the director of the San Francisco Black Coalition on AIDS and co-founded the HIV Education and Prevention Project of Alameda County. Gerald also serves on the boards of Priority Africa Network and the National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. He is a former board member of Eyewitness Palestine and led its first African heritage delegation to Palestine and Israel in 2011. Gerald was also a leader of the movement against South African apartheid from 1977 to 1994. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 9,397 Nikkei incarcerated at the Minidoka concentration camp in Idaho is Sato Hashizume. Sato was born in Japan but grew up in Portland, Oregon. When the exclusion orders were issued against Japanese Americans, Sato's family was forced to sell her father's business and were evicted and imprisoned at the Portland Assembly Center. The family was later incarcerated at Minidoka WRA concentration camp in Idaho. When Minidoka closed, Sato and her family were again forced to move, this time settling in Salt Lake City, Utah. She stepped up at the age of 14 to help provide for the family, working as a domestic. Sato later attended nursing school and began a fulfilling nursing career. She currently discusses learning more about the incarceration experiences of other Japanese Americans years after the war's end and contributing to a multicultural approach to nursing care. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 17,814 Nikkei incarcerated at the Posting concentration camp in Arizona is Emiko Omori. Emiko is an award-winning producer and community activist. In her retirement from filmmaking, she continues to use her skills honed from over 50 years to be a voice for justice and equality. Emiko is creating short pieces for Student for Solidarity and the Wakasa Memorial Committee. She joined in several actions, the first to Crystal City DOJ camp in Texas, to Dilley, Texas to protest the illegal incarceration of families by ICE and the separation of families, traveled to Fort Sill, Oklahoma and El Paso, Texas, sites of ICE detention centers, and went to Alcatraz Island last November for the 52nd anniversary of the occupation by Indians from all tribes. Currently, a short video Emiko produced for the 80th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066, When Rabbit Left the Moon, is being shown at the Asian Art Museum. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 8,475 Nikkei incarcerated at the Thrower concentration camp in Arkansas is Dr. Anthony Brown. Dr. Brown was born on the Presidio of San Francisco in 1953. His father, Willie Brown, was a career soldier who met and married Anthony's mother, Sumi Ojita, in her native Tokyo after World War II. He attended the University of Oregon on an Army ROTC scholarship and then served in Europe from 1975 to 1980 as a captain in military intelligence. Dr. Brown returned to San Francisco in 1980 to pursue a professional music career, performing and touring internationally with progressive jazz groups. Dr. Brown, Mark Izu, John Jang, Glenn Horiuchi, Francis Wong, and others founded the Asian American Jazz Movement, performing for fundraisers and benefit concerts supporting the redress and reparations movement. A PhD in ethnomusicology, Dr. Brown was a Smithsonian Associate Scholar and is currently a professor at the California Jazz Conservatory in Berkeley. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 8,130 Nikkei incarcerated at the Topaz concentration camp in Utah is Toru Saito. Toru, known as the Japanese Bing Crosby, was born December 11, 1937 in Japantown, San Francisco. He is a musician, artist, writer, community leader who has led a number of pilgrimages back to Topaz, Utah, where he was imprisoned with his family during World War II. He is a retired mental health clinician from the City of Berkeley Adult Outpatient Mental Health Clinic. He is the singer and bandleader of his Shanghai Bar Band and has performed professionally from Seattle to Hawaii since 1978, singing pop standards from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. He lives in Berkeley, California. Lighting the candle in remembrance of the 18,789 Nikkei incarcerated at the Tule Lake concentration camp in California is Judy Hamaguchi. Judy is the president of the San Francisco chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League. Her story is a convergence of World War II family experiences. Her mother put on her helmet and escaped into a bomb shelter during the bombing of Tokyo. Her father served in the U.S. Army. Her stepfather was a witness to the bombing of Hiroshima. Her uncle, a hibakusha, was a child in Nagasaki when his school was bombed. Her family camp is posted. Judy feels honored to light a candle today and represents the San Francisco JACL in memory of Greg Moritani, who was dedicated to the work of the JACL and to the education of people across the country to tell the story of Executive Order 9066. To honor the courage and determination of those people unjustly incarcerated by the United States government during World War II, in memory of those who today are experiencing violations of their civil and human rights, we now observe a moment of silence.
Thank you so much to Reverend Joanne Tolosa and Reverend Rodney Yano of the Conco Church for the ritual purification, and to all of our candle lighters. They are outspoken champions of our community. Now, final thoughts from our dear friend, Reverend Gary Barbary of the Japanese American Religious Federation, followed by a closing benediction by the beloved Reverend Elaine Donlin of the Buddhist Church of San Francisco.
My name is Gary Barbary, and I am representing the Japanese American Religious Federation, an assembly of 12 congregations in the Japanese American community, representing Christian, Buddhist, and independent Japanese religious faith traditions. A reading from the prophet Micah, chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with tens thousands of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. The prophet Micah urges us to remember, not to forget the things that have happened to us, the things that people have done to us. He urges us to remember and not forget our enemies and those who hurt us. On this, the 80th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066, we do remember that our government incarcerated all of our people in the western half of the United States. At the time, our people did not know what to do. At first, there was a kind of idealism. Well, we will come together and we will make the best of a bad situation. The government did not know what they would do to us. We should have known. We could have known, because this was not the first time, and we were not the first people who had been rounded up and locked up The Native Americans who occupied some of the lands where the internment camps were located, they knew, they remembered, and they told us. The Department of the Interior had a long history of administrating containment sites based on race and captivity. One thing that we did not know is that we did not know about the power of hate. At the time, we did not know, but now we know. We know many things about what it means to be resilient people. And it feels like we have come to a new era at this 80th anniversary. We can look forward to new accomplishments and solidarity with other communities. The Department of Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, at the 52nd anniversary of the occupation of Alcatraz Island by Native American activists 52 years ago, she suggested that we have entered a new era, an era in which our people will be at the table before decisions are made. We can look to the accomplishments, and we know about the idealism that inspires hope and perseverance. We know about the heroism and resiliency that is inspired by a people of hope. But we also know what it means to confront realism. We know what it means to confront hate and to be resilient. We know all of these things because we have heard stories called forth from our own people and from those others in solidarity with us. We know because in recent years, in recent months, in recent weeks, we have seen with our own eyes, touched with our own hands, the power of hate against our people. We know and acknowledge the power of idealism to inspire action. But we don't know everything, not yet, because we have not heard every voice. And we are listening, we are looking, and we are hoping, and we are acting. What we do know what God calls us to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with those who are seeking the freedom of all, because nobody is free unless everyone is free.
Hello, my name is Reverend Elaine Donlan from the Buddhist Church of San Francisco. There is an ancient Buddhist text that I frequently turn to in times of much needed healing from the ongoing divisions and injustice in this world. It's called the Metta Sutra, and it begins. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. May all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any situation. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. May all beings be cared for and loved, be listened to, understood, and acknowledged despite different views. Be accepted for who they are in this moment. Be afforded patience, be allowed to live without fear of having their lives taken away. May all beings be well in its broadest sense, be fed, be clothed, be treated as if their life is precious, living without fear of one another, being able to speak freely in a voice and mind of undeniable love. With a boundless heart, one should cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. May all beings dwell with a heart suffused with love for oneself, for each other, and for all beings everywhere. In my Shin tradition, we celebrate our universal oneness with this grateful expression. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu.
Thank you, Reverend Donlan, for the ritual purification. I want to give a special shout out to Reverend Ron Kubata, who retired from the Buddhist Church of San Francisco and now lives in the Pacific Northwest. He's in our audience tonight. Remember, on this 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066, we must all do our part to carry the light for justice and push for the passage of reparations for Japanese Latin Americans and African Americans. You can make a difference. Thanks to your recent efforts, Amachi concentration camp in Granada, Colorado is on its way to becoming a part of the national park system. There are 3 important calls to action that need your help now. We'll be giving you specifics on upcoming events and displaying information on how you can help at the end of this broadcast. This concludes our program this evening. On behalf of the Bay Area Day of Remembrance Committee, we want to acknowledge the generosity of our sponsors, donors, and participating consortium organizations listed at the end of this broadcast.